So obviously the show is really gaining traction, and it's like one of my favorite shows on TV right now. Huge fan of yours, Dean, from the Librarian series with Noah Wiley, the movies. The Judas Chalice is my favorite. Tell me about the inception of the arc. What inspired you guys to write this series?
You know, it's a kind of a love letter, a throwback to the kind of science fiction that we both fell in love with and made us want to do this for a living. And you know, I wrote the original pilot. My first draft was like way darker and edgier, and then Syfy encouraged me to make it more like my other shows, and then we did. And I begged him to come on board because we had done The Outpost together, and I loved working with him. I love his writing. I've learned so much from him. And so, you know, luckily I had these Polaroids of him that I was able to blackmail him to get him to do the show, and he came on board.
Blackmail's always good, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Me and my wife.
Now we're going down the dark rabbit hole.
Yes. Yeah, I'm going to stop there.
Did Syfy not want the darker, edgier? Because that sounds very interesting.
You know, I think the thing is that when I wrote it really dark and edgy, it was because people told me I couldn't do that. They said, "Oh, your stuff is also light. You can't do this." So I kind of wrote it just to show I could do it, but I don't really like doing that. I like the Librarians and the Outpost, and my real feelings in life is very optimistic, and I actually have a lot of faith in mankind, and so I know that that's how he feels. So for me, when Syfy said, "Could this be a little bit more like your other shows?" I was so relieved. It's like, oh, good. I don't have to live in a horribly dark world of horrible people who are just terrible all the time.
And the truth is, there's so much of the dark stuff on right now. There's some great stuff, but there's a lot of it. So I'm happy to do. That's one of the reasons I wanted to do it. Is it's a breath of fresh air. You know, it's a show you go to watch just to be entertained and laugh, and it's a roller coaster. It's not this dark thing.
I can enjoy watching certain dark and edgy shows, but when you make a show, you have to live in it for a year and a half of your life, and I don't know if I wanted to live in that dark world for a year and a half, especially while we're going through COVID and all these other issues in the world.
Exactly.
The thing that I think is kind of interesting is that I spent my entire career making escapist entertainment, and it's always been kind of looked down on as like a lesser of the arts. It's popular or whatever. But when you live through a pandemic and you live through hard economic times, suddenly the idea of escaping an hour a week is a really needed thing for society. So I feel like for us to be able to go back and do escapist entertainment in a time that it actually serves a purpose, it's really fun.
So then you guys know each other then?
I find it interesting when you talked about that vision of optimism and humanity, because I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and that was entirely Roddenberry's vision. Is that
100%.
people are generally good, and we want to do things that are good for humankind and work with each other, which, as you might mention, has kind of been getting away from it. But I've been seeing a lot of general overall parallels with Deep Space Nine in this series, where it kind of started out with a few little crisis of the week episodes, and then kind of is morphing into now a much bigger storyline and a much more ongoing characters. One thing that was occurring to me is that for example, Deep Space Nine, they would have 7 or 8 episodes in a row, some massive storyline, and then there would be an episode or two where they got a break.
Right.
And you get to see more character development. I'm wondering if anything like that is going to be happening, or is it going to be constantly crisis to crisis to crisis?
No, the crises were stacked at the beginning of the show because the ship was damaged, and we didn't think it would feel at all real if it's just suddenly the ship was going fine. Yeah. So we tried to kind of deal with it all, get the fuel, get the food, get all that, get the water, and then we can go away from that stuff. Mm-hmm. So there won't be crisis the week after this. It's there's a few crises, obviously there have to be, but they're in space after all, but not like it was in the first 3-4 episodes.
Yeah, I mean, this is the two things about this show is that it's not 1,000 years in the future.
Yeah.
It's 100 years in the future, and 100 years where a big chunk of those years we kind of stopped growing as a society because we were trying to get off the planet before it burned down, right? So the world that this exists in shrinks to literally the people on the ship. So, you know, for us, it was like, what happens to these people? Who are these people? So this is not really a show that has like aliens showing up with giant laser battles or that kind of stuff. At the end
Until
of
season 18.
don't give away season 18 yet. But you know, for us, it's really like this microcosm of our world in a pressure cooker where every single decision is life and death. You know, I think coming through what we've come through, we've watched people really disagree on how to deal with important issues, and it put us at odds with each other. But I think for the most part, everybody wanted to live through it, you know. And ultimately, it looks like we are going to survive these tragedies. And I think that's kind of what's going on the ship, is that they just have very different ideas on how to survive.
Yeah, I mean, that was shown just in the clip you had in the panel.
Yeah.
With, you know, Trust having his own version of what he thought they should do.
And I think that's the thing that's even interesting with Trust, is that he seems so evil. I mean, he seems like such a bad guy, but his intention is to save mankind. Now, he's an egomaniac, billionaire, so he has a different perspective. But, you know, in this odd way, they're all trying to do the same thing. They're not coming from a place of evil intent.
Yeah.
But these differences of opinion is what causes friction and drama and problems. So this is a show that's always going to lean heavily on the characters and what they're going through and their particular ways of trying to succeed, which is often at odds with the others.
So with the introduction of Trust, William Trust and his wife, Helena, there's obviously new threats coming around. And then Samantha, your daughter, is also on the show, who seems a little duplicitous.
You think?
So what can you tell us about the new threats and how you incorporated the egomaniac billionaire? And I also wanted to ask about Lieutenant Sharon Garnett and why you chose to make her a clone.
That's a lot of questions.
I'm sorry.
Let's start with the last one, Sharon, because that's the easy one. We pretty much knew right from the start. I said to Dean, "So did she kill him?" And he said, "I'm not sure yet." And I said, "Well, if she didn't kill him, then it's got to be something really out there." And that's when we came up with the idea that she was a clone, because we wanted to keep the audience believing it was her. And if we didn't have some kind of evidence other than her talking to the guy at the end of the pilot, they wouldn't think that. So it was really more for that reason. But the other thing is that it gave us a great bunch of stories to go to, which we visited in the one with the solar flare.
Yes.
So I think that answers that question.
Yes.
Just to kind of also jump on that, the other thing that I thought was interesting is that usually clones are treated like some kind of android or something. And the more we talked about it, we thought, you know, it's almost like in vitro. You know, it's just another way of life being created, but it's still a human life. In her case, she was augmented to have some additional abilities that would make it more likely for success in space travel. But we thought it was an interesting way, again, of looking at what is being human, what is humanity, and so this gave us a new look into that discussion.
And again, another thing coming out of real science is I had read an article about how they were talking about experimenting with genetically altering people for spaceflight, to go to Mars in particular. And I thought, that's really interesting, you know, how far you want to go with that. Because you can make a superhuman, you know, if you wanted to.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what set us down that path. What was the other question before that?
Regarding the new threats, like what was your inspiration behind the egomaniac billionaire and the
Dean's
threats that
idea
are coming
right from
forth?
The start was these ships were built by billionaires like they're being built today.
Yeah, I think the thing was, we were saying, right now you've got NASA, you've got governments that have regulations, but you also have these billionaires who are doing this stuff. What happens if the governments and their regulations get weaker and weaker, and the billionaires get stronger and stronger? There is no oversight on how a ship is built. You know, I have fun listening on Twitter. You know, someone says, "Well, why didn't they build this on the ship?" Because the egomaniac who built it didn't think it was necessary. Maybe if there'd been regulations, they would have had the backup system or the this or the that. So for us, it was fun to kind of look at what does the future look like, unregulated and controlled by people who are not controllable.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Sorry. Oh, one more question. Oh yeah, then I'll go to a good one.
You were going to ask a bad one?
Well, I was going to comment on something you said, but what I'd like to know is what is going on Earth, and are we ever going to see that, or are we going to be kept like the Ark 1 people, like completely in the dark?
Well, Kelly tells us in her first episode what went on Earth, and that's pretty much what we think it was.
But I mean, but it's really minor. Like, I think that would be an awesome series as well. Like, just how does society react when they know there's limited time to live? And
But that would be one of those dark series.
to me, that's like a fascinating
No, I
aspect
agree.
of the
I agree.
show.
That would be very cool.
I think for our show, it was important that they can't go home again.
Yeah.
But you know, I don't think we're ever going to be a show that has parallel storylines in flashbacks. But we do occasionally like to use flashbacks to illuminate things. But I think the thing for our storytelling is we want the audience to learn things as our crew does.
Okay.
So we'll slowly peel that onion, and there's a lot more story to be told. You know, we hinted at like what happened to Lane's father on the moon base. So we will touch onto those stuff, but it'll always be in relation to a story that's happening now, as opposed to following dual storylines.
Yeah. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.